Brilliance Audio presents Romance of the Grail, The Magic and Mystery of Arthurian Myth by Joseph Campbell, edited by Evans Lansing Smith, performed by Stefan Rudnicki. The high period of the Arthurian romances is exactly that of the building of the cathedrals, the wonderful century from 1150 to 1250 A.D. In my view, this period, Gothic times, is the counterpart to the Homeric period. We have two great Europes, the Europe of Greece and Rome, and the Europe of the Celts and Germans. The stress is on the individual not as the subject of the state, but as a citizen of the state being a vehicle of his or her will. This is a European mindset. There have been moments in history when, on this little peninsula of European consciousness, in the field of the great Eurasian-African world mass, the individual has stood forth. In the Greek understanding of what happened at Marathon and Thermopylae, you already have the Greeks appreciating themselves as very different from the whole Orient. There was enormous respect for the Egyptians, but they were Oriental. And in the Orient, you don't have individuals. You have people of certain types, certain memberships, certain races, certain strata of society. The principle of Dharma and of what Yeats called the primary mask, both of which are put on you by society, relieve the individual of personal responsibility. This is the attitude of the soldier. A good soldier is not responsible for what he does. He is responsible for how well he does it. And that's the attitude of Oriental life. When a draft comes along and a Western individual becomes a soldier, very often he has a terrific psychological crisis to face because he has to move into another order of virtue where there are no individuals but only agents of an impersonal order. Of course, no one is responsible for the order either, because that comes down from the ancestors, so no one is responsible for anything, and you have an absolutely cold-blooded situation. Once when I was in Bombay, I asked a gentleman out on the street the way to the post office, and he pointed it out to me. I said, "Thank you very much." He said, "Oh, it's just my duty," and walked on. I thought, holy God! Wouldn't you expect to get a more human response to a little question like that? An Oriental religion swept into Europe with real force at the end of the 4th century, namely Christianity, with all humankind inheriting Adam's sin and all humankind possibly saved by Jesus' deed, with no individual doing anything on his own. The sin wasn't yours in the first place, nor was the salvation. This became the official state religion of the whole of the Roman Empire. People weren't allowed to think anything else. A century or so later, of course, the European portion of the Roman Empire collapsed, and what we called Rome from then on is really Constantinople, which is Byzantium, which is Asia again. So this totally alien point of view was imposed on Europe. Europe had perfectly good religions and mythologies, and then this other thing was brought in on top of it. And what you got then, in the creative life in Europe throughout the Middle Ages, was an attempt on the part of the European mind to assimilate this Levantine emphasis on the collective and translate it into something like European thinking. In my view, the pinnacle of that achievement is the moment represented in the Arthurian romances, written down in the 12th and 13th centuries. In these works, you have a Christian vocabulary, but completely European forms of consciousness. In the late 13th century, however, after the establishment of the Inquisition, we hear very little of new creative productions in the spirit of the Arthurian romances. We find rewritings of them, translations of them, and so forth, the most important for the English-speaking world being Malory's Morte d'Arthur. But there's no more important creativity after about 1230 A.D.